And as Neil says, yeah, I'm going to talk about AI for social good. And before I do that, I'll just introduce myself and a bit of background about Nesta. So my name's Kyle Usher. I'm the Scotland Programme Manager for Nesta. And Nesta is an innovation foundation, and our purpose is to design, test, and scale new solutions to society's biggest problems and inspire innovation for social good. So this area, AI, using new technology to power social good is very much part of what Nesta is about. And I'm joined by Murray Collins from Space Intelligence, and Space Intelligence, one of the projects that we funded through our AI for Good fund last year. And Murray will be giving us sort of a practical example, an application of AI for social good. But I'm hoping that this short session gives people an idea of the different types of applications of AI and how that can be used to tackle the social challenges of our time. And hopefully also to make sort of a moral case for exploring AI across different sectors to tackle social challenges. So firstly, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? We'll all have heard of it, I'm sure. And we actually will interact with it on almost a daily basis in one form or other. We may not see it or notice it every day, but things like, smart assistants that I certainly use every day, smart banking apps, advertising models, Spotify playlists, all these things are sort of powered behind the scenes by some kind of AI or machine learning or autonomous system. And things, really importantly, things like early warning systems. So it was actually a Canadian AI system that was one of the first to issue the first warnings about the threat of COVID-19 in December 2019. AI helps fly planes and is also driving autonomous cars. So it's very much being more and more utilized in ways that we interact with. But, the term AI is thrown around a lot. It's really a general purpose term for a suite of different technologies that use computer processing power to solve problems. And these problems would otherwise require human understanding and reasoning to complete. So that's why we use the term intelligence. But it's important, I think, to note that machine intelligence and human intelligence actually work very differently. We call it AI, artificial intelligence, because it sort of does a job that humans do, but actually they work very differently. And that's important because we can then actually use human strengths with machine strengths to bring sort of, to collaborate and bring the best outcomes. So, they very much have different strengths. And we're not necessarily trying to replicate human intelligence with machines, at least not yet. But to use AI as a tool to achieve things at a great scale, or actually things that humans can't do. So, for example, we could bring the curiosity and intent of human intelligence to ask really interesting questions and test ideas. We could have the moral and ethical judgment from humans and bring that then alongside the scale and speed of artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities to process huge volumes of data and to give us results that we would just otherwise, wouldn't be able to reach just by humans alone. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how we can use human intelligence and machine intelligence together to have sort of, better outcomes. And before I give you an overview of the types of projects we funded through the fund, I want to just sort of set a bit of a challenge really for anyone on the call or anyone watching this on the website, to actually explore whether you could leverage AI yourselves in your own organizations to address social challenges. Through this work, I've found that actually this isn't a question that many people are asking themselves. If they're not an AI practitioner, like Murray, an AI expert, they're not thinking, how can I use AI in my work, whether it's public sector or third sector, especially where you're very close to a social problem and your target is, addressing that social problem. People quite often just are busy doing that and they don't really stop and think, actually, have I considered using AI to do this better or deliver on some areas of my work? So I want to set that up as a sort of a challenge, because I actually feel it's almost sort of a moral imperative to at least explore this. That might sound really way too heavy, but we've seen this throughout history when there's new technologies that come in. the new sort of emerging technologies often bring us these moral questions. Should we use this technology to actually help society, or essentially sort of leave it to people who are going to leverage it and use it for purely sort of financial gain, or to corner a market? And there's implications of using new technologies in this way, but there's also implications in not. So I just want to give a quick example here that, let's just say you work for a public sector organization or third sector organization. You probably have limited budgets, especially at the moment, and everything that's happening with COVID and throughout the world. And you probably have an overstretched service of some form or other. Now, if you knew that you could provide more support, not just more support actually, but if you could identify where that support was most needed to take action for the greatest impact for your service users, if you knew that information and decided not to actually act on that, I would say that's sort of an ethical decision. Or let's say that you worked in healthcare and you knew that you could identify health conditions earlier. You could diagnose them earlier and not just improve the care that you could provide to that individual or the long-term outcomes for them, but actually reduce your own costs and provide a better service across the board of your services. If you knew how to do that and didn't do that, it would be seen as sort of a professional neglect in some way. And that's not to sort of put too much pressure on people watching this, but with AI, it's possible to do these things, to know more earlier. So it might not be in your hands just now. You might not have access to that information, that technology, but it exists. So I think exploring it and seeing if that's something you should bring into your work is kind of a moral question. So with that in mind, our project and the report from our project really touched quite a lot on AI ethics. It's a really interesting and important part of the conversation around the use of AI for social challenges. And we had invited Shannon Vala, who's an expert on AI ethics, to contribute to our report. And I just want to share some thoughts from Shannon. Now, that the possibilities for a good AI are as limitless as our moral intelligence and creativity. And it's those human qualities that we must integrate with technical intelligence to create a culture of ethical AI in Scotland. I think that's a great sort of challenge for everyone working in AI, that we have our moral intelligence as humans alongside this sort of extended capability that AI gives us. Shannon also says about how we need to kind of focus on good uses of AI and not use this technology as a kind of a social license to just kind of go on and do what we're wanting to do, but to actually consider how we use it, which is really important as well. And Moira McKenzie from DHI, Digital Health and Care Innovation Centre, it's now renamed as, talked about sort of co-designing and collaborating with our users when we build AI systems, so that we are creating this sort of good and healthy and unbiased AI, which is also a really important point for us to consider. So I'm getting to our projects now, which is really the meat of this conversation. And we ran our AI for Good Fund to discover a couple of things. So firstly, which AI innovators exist in Scotland just now? Who are they? What are the social issues they're trying to address, and how are they using technology to do that? We know that AI is an emerging field and there's loads of activity, but actually we weren't sure exactly who was doing what. And we were really keen to find that out, because we wanted to showcase those ideas externally and hopefully encourage others to sort of pick up AI tools and approaches to do the same. And we also weren't sure exactly how would we best to support them. So our fund was a small grant fund, and alongside that came a sort of package of support that we had certain ideas for, but the program kicked off on 1st of March, I think it was, last year. So obviously a lot of those ideas changed over the following 9 months. And thirdly, we were keen to share those ideas externally and encourage others to do the same. So that was the idea behind AI for Good. And we got 7 projects that we funded, and they're each looking at a different social issue or different area of society. So I'm just going to go through 6 of them now, and the 7th one is space intelligence, and I'll hand over to Moira for that bit. And I'll share sort of what the problem was that they're dealing with and how they're looking to address it. The first project was Heriot-Watt University, their interaction lab, and they were looking at the problem of actually gendered AI. So the project was looking at AI itself. and how there's sort of two things here. One is that, a lot of our AI systems that we design and build, smart assistants, etc., are actually sort of modeled on young submissive women. And, they were exploring why is that, and actually what does that, what issues does that cause in the interaction between humans and these conversational assistants? And especially where it comes to sort of abuse of these virtual assistants. Harriet Watts designed their own virtual assistant, which is used online to, they've sort of plugged it into an AI system that's selling people carbon credits. And it turns out that even something as sort of dry a topic as carbon credits, the virtual assistant gets online abuse, quite often sort of sexualized abuse. And the responses from Google Assistant, Alexa, and Siri are quite often not great in this type of situation. So Harriet Watts' project was to design their own chatbot and virtual assistant, and then try out different responses to abuse and see what happens. Is the best thing to do to sort of shut down and actually not continue the conversation, or are there cues that you can give the user which is useful? The second project was City of Glasgow College. They had developed an adult literacy app, which they already had in production and testing. And this is something for obviously low literacy learners, adults with very low literacy. So it needs to be very intuitive, and actually it's mostly ran on voice commands. But the issue they found is when they're trying to help people to learn to read through voice commands, actually the existing AI systems weren't great with short words or short phrases, and especially when it came to strong accents. And City of Glasgow College, obviously a lot of their users are Glasgow based. And if you've seen the Kevin Bridges sketch he does on trying to get his cinema to understand which film he wants to watch through it with his very strong Glaswegian accent, you can get an idea of how that goes. So they've used an AI to teach the app itself based on the user's own voice profile, essentially what the words are that they're trying to say. And this will learn as the user goes. So it's very much using machine learning as well as this kind of virtual assistant side of AI, which is great. Obviously, it's addressing a social challenge of low literacy, and it's doing it in a super smart way. Thirdly, Blackwood Homes and Care. So obviously a care provider. And, for them, this last year has been really, really difficult. And this project has, it's actually shows it's more necessary now than it was before. But Blackwood have, technology as part of their care. And they are using smart meters and the energy that goes through smart meters to then sort of have sort of monitoring of their tenants, but completely passive. They're not using cameras or audio devices, but the smart meter can understand what the natural pattern of someone's day is when they get up and switch the light on, when they put the kettle on, how often they open the fridge. And there's no sort of human involved in that and sort of spying on them. It's the system itself can just understand as the person goes about their day, if they're okay, basically if they need to raise an alert. And if there's some behavior or lack of behavior that shows that actually maybe someone's having an issue, there can be alerts raised to support staff or even family or carers who can check in on that person. This type of AI system, raising alerts is one thing, but actually understanding how people go about their day and how what sort of clues are that someone's healthy versus the clues that someone maybe has deteriorating health over a period of time, could be over a few weeks or months. If they're moving around less, these things actually I think are really, really interesting for sort of future healthcare, how we can all be looked after better into our older age. I think there's huge applications for this, and Blackwood are doing great work. The next one is Redstar AI. So this is an AI company, and they are working with doctors to be able to interpret the case history of years worth of doctor's notes to find the really small clues throughout someone's sort of health history of what might cause future issues. So they need a huge amount of data for this, hundreds of thousands of patient records, can then use the machine learning to interpret and create kind of a normal pattern. And then they can find these little clues, and it could be things like clues that might cause foot ulcers. And something like that sounds quite small to me, but it turns out these things actually will exaggerate and become an issue further down the line. So very much the example I gave before of being able to spot health conditions earlier and treat them earlier, saving time and money, but also better outcomes for the patient. That example was really based on this. That it seems like something that this would essentially be, almost impossible for a human to go through 100,000 people's, sort of medical history and be able to understand these patterns that occur and what those issues could be further down the line. The next one is Boxio. So they have a chatbot, and this is for young people's mental health support. And again, over the last 12 months, this is a massive question. We don't actually know what the pandemic is doing to young people's mental health. And because a lot of support services are not being interacted with in the normal way, this type of AI-enabled smartphone app, is a real opportunity to support people in a remote way. Has obvious advantages that people can sort of talk with anonymity. They don't, they're not talking to a real person. That also has its own challenges. It's not a clinical, it's not a clinician who they're talking to. But this chatbot is very much about trying to give people that early support and then get them further support, whether that's further reading or actually, booking appointments with a clinician. It's the type of early stage support that seems really, really vital. And then finally, before I hand over to Murray, University of Edinburgh's sort of robotics lab actually are doing some amazing work where they already work on robotic limbs, but the issue is that you don't get feedback, you don't have nerves in those limbs. And the example on the right here in the image is essentially saying, how can you hold a child's hand firm enough that they don't run into the road and let go, but not so firm that you actually cause them pain or injury. And this can happen through the addition of AI. It's partly that it can give haptic feedback to the user, so sort of mimic sensory feedback, but also that the AI system can understand what it's gripping. So, you could throw a ball and the hand would actually help you grasp that, or it could pick up an egg without crushing it, that it understands the level of grip that it needs for each object. So it's something that obviously, the robotics is really great at the minute. There's amazing work that they're doing, but this next level of actually the haptic feedback and helping people to grasp things with the right amount of pressure in the right way is really the next stage of that. And it's really, really interesting, exciting work that they're doing. Just don't ask them to show you the videos, which are quite gruesome. I'm quite squeamish, so it wasn't great for me to see that example. So that's the 6 projects, and I'm going to hand over to Murray to talk about his project, so I won't really do that. But just to say that this was sort of the other example I gave when I was talking about actually being able to know more about your subject area. And the reason I've chosen Murray and space intelligence to present just now is that I think this is an example that I certainly wouldn't have sort of guessed would be useful to a charity. So Murray and his team worked with Scottish Wildlife Trust on this piece of work. And if there's any charities or maybe even public sector organizations watching this, the challenge is, to try and think outside the box a bit and think about how AI could help you, maybe in ways that you haven't considered yet. So I'll leave it there and hand over to Murray, and we'll be back for Q&A shortly. So Murray, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And I wanted to say, well, thank you to Neil and Kyle for having me today and for inviting me. I'm going to be talking about AI and its ability to support sustainability. So a little bit about me and the company. I'm Dr. Murray Collins. I'm the co-founder along with Professor Ed Mitchard. And we have a fantastic team of very talented Earth observation scientists and developers who specialize in particular in geospatial analysis. So we've grown a lot in the past year in particular. We're just under 3 years old as a company, and particularly growing around developing information to support nature-based solutions to climate change and biodiversity loss. So this is the big question, really. Why are we doing this? Globally, we face these huge range of interlinked challenges. So biodiversity loss, we now think about 1 million species are at risk of extinction through various processes, running about 1,000 times the background rate of species lost. So this is our impact on the planet. Poverty and hunger. We need to feed another 1 billion people in the coming decade without further reducing biodiversity and also in a changing climate. Climate change is obviously like the defining issue of our time. We're forcing the climate into a different state with our carbon dioxide emissions. And this is a problem in its own right, but it feeds into those preceding two challenges. So the need to respond to these challenges is captured in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But for the purposes of this project, we're really talking about number 15, life on land. So let's zoom in on land use in Scotland. Well, climate crisis is fundamentally related to land use because land use change is one of the major drivers of carbon emissions. So that means, as a consequence, that improved land management will allow Scottish Government, all of us, to meet emissions targets and improve biodiversity conservation. And so to be able to understand how well we're doing, we need to measure our performance in land management. And we have a means to do that, the Natural Capital Asset Index, but there's a major information gap. What we need is high accuracy land cover maps provided at scale, which are repeated annually. And this really isn't available. So why do we use satellite data to address this challenge? Well, as of today, we have over 1,000 Earth observing satellites already in orbit. There's quite an exaggerated diagram on the right there. Obviously, the satellites aren't that large, but gives you some indication of how much is already flying around in space, providing up to, well, hundreds of terabytes of free data per day, which is astonishing. And this data allows us to look down on Earth on a weekly basis, and actually some satellite constellations, like from Planet, are providing daily acquisitions over the Earth. This is really, really powerful stuff. So this is what it looks like, the European satellite on the left-hand side, Sentinel-2. So this is reflected sunlight. On the right-hand side, a radar image. So you see quite different things. And this is an example over Malaysia. One of the advantages of the radar on the right-hand side is it sees through cloud. But they're both different types of data are useful for different purposes. But overall, it's really, really useful for our challenge of filling that gap for land management. But broadly, I would say that with those hundreds of terabytes of data being provided every day, we're drowning in data for want of information. So why bring in AI? I think often when we speak to people in space intelligence, or just even if you're speaking to friends and family, people just naturally relate AI to this sort of futuristic and often dystopian scenario with robots taking over the world. And as Kyle says, this is an application of artificial intelligence, which is as far as is possible, I think, really from that kind of environment. What we're doing in practice is really running lots of strings of code, and what that enables us to do, the real sort of takeaway point, is that the artificial intelligence allows us to make sense of those huge amounts of satellite data. So that's why we're bringing satellites and AI together. And given we've got a Q&A session, I thought I'd throw a question in here to the audience. I'm curious to know if anybody has a very large amount of data, which you had the intuition it could be useful, but really don't know how to run that analysis in practice. Thought it'd be a good one to throw out there. But taking us back to this core point that the AI enables us to classify the large volumes of satellite data to address our challenge. This is broadly a schematic of how it works. So we have these information coming in from optical, so reflected sunlight, and then radar sensors. We then use training data sets, which enable us to say in any given pixel what is the land cover type. So here we might say this is a forested area. This area here is agriculture. This area here is urban. We repeat that lots of times. That creates a training data set. We then use machine learning, that's the AI bit, to create a model. And we then predict land use types across the landscape. And this is what we're making as an output. This is what one of our maps looks like and what helps the Scottish Wildlife Trust in land management. So very high quality, high resolution map, which distinguishes between the different land cover types in any particular area. And we've now done this right across Scotland, supported originally by Nesta. So that's what we produce at the end of this technical process. But really, the development process is all about the users. Users are all important because this is a very technical schematic. But really, you need to have engaged users as a company like Space Intelligence in order to be able to produce something useful. And something we discovered when working with Scottish Wildlife Trust and Nature Scot, that engaged users can help you even produce more and better training data and improve the quality of your analysis. So this is a team on the left-hand side from the Scottish Wildlife Trust. And then on the right-hand side, we have me with a team from Nature Scot. So these are the instrumental players. And again, thanks to Nesta for supporting this work. Well, so what we actually did in practice is provide land cover mapping for a series of years over a couple of test sites. And this provides the classified landscape, as I just suggested. But when you have a number of years of data, then you can start to detect land cover change. And so that enables you to track the performance of your environmental management. So why is that important? Going back to our original set of challenges, if you picked up the newspaper today or digitally opened a newspaper today, you'll see that the new biodiversity economics report produced by Das Gupta and others has just been published. And really, they're making the case that if we don't include nature in our economic models, then we're really doomed to face extreme risk and continuing those processes of biodiversity loss and climate change. And so that means we really need information which is incorporated into national accounts to see how well we're doing in terms of addressing those major challenges. And so those maps that we're producing with the Scottish Wildlife Trust and Nature Scot, it crucially enables natural capital asset index tracking. So a natural capital asset will be forest, the amount of meadows that you have, all of those different types of natural capital assets produce flows of ecosystem services. So producing clean water, sequestering carbon, producing soil fertility. And these technologies, the application of AI on those large amounts of satellite data, allow us to produce those high accuracy maps, which could then over time, when we have this change detection component, allow us to monitor the state of the natural environment in Scotland. So that's really what the natural capital asset index tracking is all about. This is a statutory requirement addressing that problem raised in the Das Gupta report, which is out today. And this is previously, it's not been possible. So AI is really enabling this statutory requirement. So very, very powerful. And the feedback from people in the Scottish Wildlife Trust and Nature Scot is that this is an absolute game changer. As a nice easy end, I'm going to give you a flyover of what one of these maps looks like on a particular subset of land cover. So in this case, we're looking at riverine forest. So this is the work we did with Scottish Wildlife Trust, who are interested in how we can improve natural capital, specifically through the application of these maps. And this fly through shows you how we are able to classify woodlands along the Tweed Valley and show where they are today, but then where we could plant trees in the future to enable better connectedness, which will improve biodiversity, but also sequester carbon and provide additional ecosystem services. So okay, I'll stop that there. And I will leave a question. So this has been an extremely powerful and valuable tool, obviously, for our users. And I'm going to leave Kyle with a question of what do you think the main funding opportunities now, given that we've benefited from Nesta funding to work with the Scottish Wildlife Trust, what do you think the main funding opportunities are for organisations that need support with large amounts of data and who could apply AI? So over to you, Kyle.
Great, thanks, Murray. Yeah, and I'm happy to take that question, and I think then Neil will take us into some Q&A himself. I mean, there's a few things around funding and AI, so I'll mention them, and if I haven't answered your question, Murray, then let me know. So the first is, I think AI is a massive opportunity just now for organizations who are looking for funding and don't ordinarily use AI. It's kind of a business imperative, I think, to be looking at your data and what you can do with that data as a lever for funding. So working for an organization who does grant funding, it's actually not that often that we see this sort of perfect storm of technology, social issue, and expertise kind of all come together in a funding application. Quite often you have an organization who's very close to the problem, the sort of social issue. They understand it really well. You know, let's say a frontline delivery organization, a charity, they really get the problem, but it's not often that they bring technology along with their solution. So one thing about space intelligence within our fund was that they had a third sector partner who understood the problem really well and could actually act on it, and then the expertise of space intelligence and technology. So that was a brilliant way to sort of pitch for the funding. And I would say that if organizations aren't currently investigating the use of AI, then they're missing out. They will miss out on funding, because organizations that do can put a really strong case together. So that's one side of it. I think, exactly where people go for funding right now is complicated, because a huge amount of funds exist, but they're all sort of looking at the problem from a different direction. So for Nesta, this was a great fund for us, but at the same time, we're actually trying to spend more of our money or endowment that we have as an organization in much more targeted ways in the coming 10 years than we have previously. So for example, this type of fund, we aren't running again, this year, but we're looking to set up longer term partnerships that we can sort of prove the impact of. So in theory, that's much larger, levels of funding through our endowment, but probably in fewer areas. So for me, for Nesta, that's our situation. For other organizations, I think it varies a lot. But I would suggest that people should be looking at their own data, partly to improve how they can operate and how they can provide their service, but also how can they actually access funding, which is looking for higher returns of impact on that funding than previously.
Fascinating. Hey, that was a really great presentation, guys. It was really super stimulating, quite awesome to learn about just such an exciting field with such a clearly powerful, potential applications of this technologies. If anyone has any questions they'd like to send through for Kyle or Murray, just use the little Q&A box at the bottom, pop them through and I'll ask them. And let me start off with the first one for you, Kyle. Just building on your previous answer there, one of the questions that struck me was, are there areas where you see, tremendous potential for applying this technology? You can clearly see that there would be great benefit, but you didn't receive applications and ideas for. So it's in areas that you would, you'd be very keen to further explore and attract new ideas for.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, one area that I was really hoping to fund was local authority, who they have a huge amount of data, and we only really had one application, and it was more of a sort of early stage idea, so it wasn't really where we were looking to fund. We wanted to fund sort of activity really. So local authorities have a huge amount of data, and they don't. I don't think they really do enough with it in terms of the types of things that they could do with it. So, for example, let's say emergency services actually, or schools. So we've seen big shift in schools over the last 12 months, and any kind of data set that you have a long history of, and you're getting that sort of regular update, can be explored and investigated. So I don't really have, specifically what they could do, but they could do a huge amount of things. And it's kind of what the Shannon Vala quote I said earlier, it's about the human creativity almost. What ideas do you have that you could ask of AI and have AI provide solutions for? There's a whole range of things that are happening within industry in terms of using AI to do things like monitor and predict when bridges might need serviced or replaced. But we're not doing that in things like public services. So for instance, like a fire service actually using AI to understand or predict when their their appliances might need to be serviced, or actually when they should be ordering new kit. And it sounds kind of trivial or maybe quite dry, but these are things that actually could save thousands and millions of pounds for our public services each year. I think the issue is that there's not necessarily people asking those questions within public services, and the focus is obviously on continued delivery, and they're stretched at all times. So who's there thinking, oh, how can we improve this? How could we use AI here? There's not really people asking those questions very much, but I would have loved to see more of those type of projects come through. And we do feature one within our Powering Good report, the end of program report for the AI for Good Fund, which was this early stage idea. So we went back to them and talked to them about what they were doing. So that can be found at the end of our report if people are interested in thinking about how public services can deliver using AI.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think especially having seen Murray's presentation, it's such a great example of just one scenario where where it could be used for for great public service benefit. So we have on that note, Murray, we have our first question, which is for you. John asks, how did you develop your machine learning model, e.g. Google, Colab, etc.? Are such models increasingly available off the shelf for organizations, or is this still a significant step?
Yeah, that's a good question. I won't go into any technical detail about precisely what we're doing, obviously, as a commercial organisation, but I can say that there is a lot of stuff which you can do off the shelf already. So let's take, for instance, there's a Python library called scikit-learn, which has a lot of machine learning technologies available off the shelf for you. Yes, you can use Colab for doing a lot of this kind of work. Obviously, we're geospatial, so we have a spatial component in our analysis, which makes it possibly a bit different to what other people are doing. But yeah, increasingly, a lot of stuff is available off the shelf. I would say that the trick is, though, you've got to understand how you actually implement it in practice. So good news, but you do need to understand why you're doing what you're doing, even if it is available off the shelf, I suppose. It would be the caveated answer.
Can I just jump in to add an example from one of the other projects? So the City of Glasgow College, they started with a completely open source product, so Google Teachable Machine, where you can feed it data, categorize it, and then when you provide more data into that, it'll based on the how you've taught it, it'll give you output. So the simplest way to describe that is that if you upload 100 photos of cats and say these are cats, and then you show it a picture of a cat, it should be able to tell you that's a cat. So yeah, off the shelf or even free to access tools are becoming more and more available. You can also, on Amazon Web Services, they have a page that shows you all of their products, and you can sort of buy some AI or buy some satellite, which I always find quite funny, that you go on there and you think, oh yeah, I could set up a website. Oh, actually I could build a robot. So these things are becoming more and more available. But I think the main issue, and Murray touched on it there, is actually having a question that you want answered. if you have that question, then you can look around and find the best way to solve it. And it could be something off the shelf, or it could be that you need to engage, some expertise. But the hardest thing, I think, is actually knowing what your question is.
Great, thank you. So we're just about out of time. So let me wrap up with one final question, which I'll put to both Kyle and Murray, which is, building on your point about the potential for use in the public sector, but you're not seeing as many ideas and applications as you would like. And also, as I introduced, with the goal of Digital Scotland and of the Scottish Government being to build a world-leading digital nation, what's your sense on what more could and should be done? And also considering, for example, getting more students involved in the practice, increasing the academic and also entrepreneurial capacity in this field. What more could we do basically to really expand the level of activity and capacity of AI in Scotland?
You want to start, Murray?
Yeah, happy to do so. So I also have a role in the University of Edinburgh. So I'm as a Chancellor's Fellow in Data-Driven Innovation, which I do. I've done for the past couple of years, and fantastic to see the amount of students who are embracing artificial intelligence and the amount of teaching which is available under the Data-Driven Innovation programme. And so there's a huge number of courses people can take and some world-leading expertise right here in Scotland. So certainly need to be able to build on that. I know from a technology ecosystem review that there needs to be an increased focus on technical skills in schools. I think if you had one thing, encouraging children in schools, enabling children in schools to get coding, focus on computer science, bringing in teachers who are specialised in computer science, and ensuring that children study at an early stage and stick with it right through to university level. That would be the one thing I would say.
And I would say we have a bit of a problem at the moment that the smartest minds of our generation are sort of quite often swallowed up by big tech to essentially get people to click on ads. That's sort of the business model that runs a lot of the world at the moment. So Murray's right that we need all those things, but actually we need people who are on the front line working on our social problems to be thinking about the use of technology in that. We need, our public services and our third sector organizations to be hiring data scientists and sort of saying we need these skills in-house. We need people who understand this stuff. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Otherwise, the brightest minds, the only place for them to work will be these companies that are more interested in ad revenue than simply, if these jobs don't exist in companies that are looking to solve these problems, it doesn't matter how many students you have with those skills, they won't be able to get jobs that don't exist. So I guess it's a marketplace. These things need to happen hand in hand. We need the jobs to exist in the organizations who are looking to solve problems, and we need people with those skills to then fill them.
Brilliant, thank you. And on that note, that really concludes with a fabulous insight and call to action. That is a message I think we can continue to spread and really help continue grow the success of this clearly great sector for Scotland. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for everyone to attend and for attending. And great thanks to Kyle and Murray for taking the time out to share that with us. I really do appreciate that and really enjoyed it. Fabulous presentations, thank you. So the recording for this session will be uploaded and available on digitalscot.live sometime later today, and we'll share that. You can also see the schedule of upcoming further events we'll be hosting. So again, thank you guys, much appreciated, and thank you everyone for attending. And have a great day, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Thanks.
Cheers, Neil. Cheers, Carl. Bye-bye.